On this island, the survivors had been holding out against the zombie invasion for a full 10 years. They laid traps in advance and fortified their camp until it was nearly impenetrable. But in a world like this, the greatest danger wasn't always the bloodthirsty undead. Ben and his two female partners worked as bounty hunters, wandering from place to place. One day, they received a mission to rescue a survivor who had been kidnapped by the Oathkeeper Church. Rachel, one of the women, wasn't keen on the job. She knew that the Oathkeepers were the largest faction left in the apocalypse, and crossing them usually meant a death sentence. But Ben had his own reasons. Their food supplies were running out. If they didn't take this job, they'd starve. Just then, a speedboat appeared in the distance. Their target was on board. Ben quickly told everyone to get into position. When the boat drew near, the two church members on board actually tried to extort them for more. Ben hid a grin and gestured. If they wanted something, let them come take it. As soon as the boat was moored, Tweeter rose out of the water with a spear gun, while Rachel fired from inside the cabin. The three of them moved with perfect coordination, and within seconds, the two kidnappers were dead where they stood. After rescuing the hostage, Tweeter urged everyone to leave immediately. If the Oathkeeper Church caught wind of this, they'd be in serious trouble. After half a day of sailing, the four of them reached a remote island. This was where the hostage, Remy, had been based all along. At the entrance, a zombie was tied up, serving as a grim warning to anyone who might try to trespass. Under a tree, Remy picked up a radio and signaled the guards to stand down. Ben escorted the hostage forward and began negotiating with the client. Seeing that Remy was safe and sound, the leader, Wyatt, was thrilled. But the moment Rachel stepped into view, Wyatt froze, staring at her in shock. There was something familiar about her face. He thought hard for a long while, before finally remembering a photo he had seen 2 years ago. Back then, a woman had visited the island and left behind a few belongings. Among them was a single photograph. Rachel's eyes widened in disbelief. Could that woman really be her long-lost sister? Desperate to know the truth, she decided to follow Wyatt into the camp and investigate. All the while, Ben kept his guard up. He noticed that the defenses here seemed surprisingly thin, but Wyatt showed nothing but confidence. According to him, his people knew exactly how to handle zombies. Wyatt then pulled a crate out from behind the bar, claiming it belonged to that mysterious woman. Rachel hurriedly opened it. Inside, she found the very photo Wyatt had described, along with a necklace that had once belonged to her sister. Now she was certain. The woman Wyatt spoke of really was her sister. But the trail ended 2 years ago, when she vanished without a trace. Tweeter noticed the look in Rachel's eyes. He swore that if her sister was still alive, he'd do everything in his power to find her. But as night fell, it was already too late for them to leave. So Remy prepared a feast to thank his rescuers. The camp was thriving, with fertile farmland and a brewery whose spirits were well known across the region. Ben, in particular, indulged himself, drinking to his heart's content. But at dawn the very next morning, a guard came rushing in with terrible news. The Oathkeeper Church had breached the walls. And worse, they had unleashed a massive horde of zombies. Wyatt cursed under his breath and shouted for his people to grab their weapons. Ben and Tweeter exchanged a glance, then decided to head straight to the front lines. After years of trial and error, the villagers had developed a system to fight the undead. Elvis, the fastest among them, would lure scattered zombies into a designated kill zone. Once the countdown hit 0, steel cables snapped upward from both sides, catching the sprinting zombies off guard. Their momentum was too great, they couldn't stop. And usually, after just one round of this trap, only a handful of the creatures were still moving. But this time was different. Under the deliberate guidance of the Oathkeepers, a significant number of zombies managed to push past the defenses. Forced to retreat into the jungle, the survivors switched to guerrilla tactics. That's when the explosives they had hidden beforehand became absolutely crucial. In the chaos, Tweeter and Ben got separated from the main group. While searching for supplies, they stumbled upon a wrecked helicopter. Tweeter climbed inside to scavenge, but in a moment of distraction, she was bitten by a lurking zombie. Ben rushed in, bashing the creature with his club again and again until it was nothing but a mangled mess. But the damage was already done. Blood was seeping from the wound on Tweeter's shoulder. Trying to stay optimistic, Ben insisted it wasn't that deep. Maybe she wouldn't turn. But Tweeter wasn't fooled. She told him plainly. If she started to change, he had to put a bullet straight through her skull. What neither of them realized was that the zombie's corpse wasn't normal at all. As it collapsed, a mask slipped off its face. Back at the camp, Rachel sensed danger closing in. She hurried into Wyatt's quarters. Inside the quarters, Rachel's eyes strayed onto a stack of old photographs lying on the table. To her shock, every single one of them showed the same person, her sister. Realizing there was no way to hide it anymore, Remy finally came clean. Rachel's sister had once been a pastor here, part of their very own community. But 2 years ago, she left with the Oathkeepers. And word was, she had since risen to become one of their high priestesses. Before Rachel could even process this revelation, the groans outside grew louder. The dead were closing in. Remy tried to keep talking, but then, crash, zombies smashed against the door with terrifying force. Rachel and Remy pushed with all their strength, but the barricade didn't hold. The creatures burst through. One lunged for Rachel, but Remy threw himself in the way, knocking it back. In the chaos, 2 others grabbed him and dragged him screaming into the dark. Rachel barely had time to scream his name before instinct took over. She dove through the window and hit the ground running. But one of the zombies wasn't letting her go. It chased her through the trees until the 2 of them tumbled into a nearby pond. Rachel fought like hell, pulling a knife from her belt and stabbing again and again until the water around her turned crimson. Soaked and trembling, Rachel returned to camp, only to find the battle had already ended. She stormed up to Wyatt, clutching the photo of her sister, demanding answers. Wyatt's shoulders slumped. He admitted the truth. The Oathkeepers' influence was far greater than anyone wanted to believe. They had spies in nearly every settlement. This camp had only survived so long because they paid tribute, huge amounts of alcohol every year. But Wyatt, he was sick of the endless exploitation. That's when Wyatt finally revealed his real plan. The bounty mission? That had been a setup from the very start, designed to lure Rachel here. Because if he could use her blood connection to the High Priestess, he might have a way to slip inside the Oathkeepers' headquarters. And once inside, his goal was simple: unleash the hordes of caged zombies and wipe the church off the map in a single blow. But Ben and Tweeter weren't having it. To them, the plan sounded reckless. Worse, it meant turning Rachel into bait. Wyatt's smile faded. He slowly stepped back, raising his weapon. If persuasion wouldn't work, intimidation would. Staring down the barrel of his gun, the 3 had no choice but to surrender. Until he could negotiate directly with the Oathkeepers, Wyatt locked them in an iron cage. And maybe because guilt gnawed at him, he shared more secrets than he should have. At the very beginning of the outbreak, the Oathkeepers' leader had watched his family die one by one. Broken and hopeless, he put a gun to his own head and pulled the trigger. But instead of dying, he survived. Day after day, Rachel's sister prayed for him, and against all odds, the man recovered. Convinced he had been chosen by the Lord of Death himself, he founded the Oathkeepers on the spot. And Rachel's sister? She became his wife, rising with him as the church's high priestess. Which meant to Wyatt, Rachel wasn't just another survivor. She was a living shield, his one and only ticket to survival. When night finally fell, Wyatt dragged Rachel out of the cage. Her sister, the high priestess herself, had already received word and rushed to meet them. And the moment she laid eyes on Rachel, the woman's calm mask cracked. She asked what it would take to set Rachel free. Wyatt didn't hesitate. He wanted 2 of the fastest boats from the Oathkeepers' fleet, and he wanted them ready by morning. To him, that was a fair trade. But the church didn't see it that way. They flatly refused. So Wyatt raised his detonator and snarled that if they wouldn't bargain, he'd blow the whole place sky high. The priestess clenched her jaw, but on her lips was the faintest smile, one directed at the Oathkeepers' leader. And before Wyatt could even return to his camp, his entire crew was ambushed. His companions were butchered on the spot. Wyatt tried to wave the detonator one last time, threatening to take them all down with him. But Elvis, his own ally, snatched it away. Turns out, Elvis had already been bought by the Oathkeepers. In seconds, the self-proclaimed mastermind was reduced to a helpless prisoner. And as for the camp's other survivors, the Oathkeepers showed no mercy. Even Elvis begged them to spare a few lives, but in their eyes, a traitor had no value. They slit his throat without a second thought. Behind the iron bars, Ben and Tweeter witnessed the slaughter unfold. Powerless to stop it, they could only watch as every fallen villager rose again, transformed into ravenous zombies. If not for the strength of their cage, the 2 of them would have been torn apart then and there. By now, Rachel and Wyatt had been dragged straight to the Oathkeepers' headquarters. Every single member had their face smeared in ritual paint, like deranged savages pretending to be saints. And her sister? She acted even stranger than the rest. She led Rachel into a secluded backyard, whispering that a ritual had to be performed before she could truly become one of them. Rachel froze. This wasn't the sister she remembered. Her sister had never forced her into anything before. Then a woman covered head to toe in paint stepped out of the shadows. Before Rachel could process what was happening, her wrists were seized, and the knife in her hands drove forward, stabbing the painted woman again and again. And that's when Rachel realized the truth. The so-called ritual was nothing more than murder. Kill a living person and watch them rise as a zombie. The cult leader didn't flinch. Instead, he congratulated Rachel with a sick grin. From this day on, he said, "You're one of us. You're family now." Meanwhile, back at the cages, Ben and Tweeter were plotting their escape. When they looked up, a zombified guard stumbled past. That's when Tweeter's eyes lit up. He snapped his fingers to draw the creature closer, then quickly slipped his hand through the bars. In one smooth motion, he snagged the keys hanging from the guard's belt. The lock finally clicked open, and the two bolted from their prison. The camp was silent now, eerily silent. Not a single survivor remained. The Oathkeepers had wiped them all out. And one thing was crystal clear. No matter what it took, Ben and Tweeter had to find Rachel before the cult finished turning her into one of their own. Ben and Tweeter geared up and followed the map straight toward the Oathkeepers' headquarters. Meanwhile, Rachel was still clinging to the hope that her sister's conscience could be awakened. She reminded her that once upon a time, she was a preacher, someone who spread love and justice. But her sister only shook her head. In a broken world like this, she said, who really gets to live the way they want? As nightfall settled in, Ben and Tweeter crept closer to the compound. Silent and deliberate, they slipped past the perimeter, quietly taking down guards one by one. Step by step, they made their way toward the heart of the stronghold, until finally, they reached the banquet hall. Peeking through the doorway, they froze. A circle of cultists had gathered inside, and at the center of it all, Wyatt lay strapped across a dining table. He wasn't a prisoner anymore. He was the main course. The cult leader took a bite of raw flesh as if it were nothing. Then he raised his voice for all to hear. Tomorrow, he would order every spy hidden across the camps to unleash their hordes of zombies and slaughter every last survivor who refused to join the faith. Before Rachel could even absorb the horror of it, a woman suddenly stumbled into the hall, looking exactly like a zombie. Rachel recoiled in terror, but her sister quickly reassured her. This wasn't an infected. This was a chosen servant of the church. To prove their devotion to the Lord of Death, they would imitate the undead long before they actually became one. That's when Rachel finally understood the truth. Every single one of these people was completely insane. The cult leader brought over a platter of raw meat, demanding that Rachel eat it. But before she could be forced, her sister quickly stepped in and stopped him. The leader's face darkened with rage. Without hesitation, he raised his gun and executed Wyatt on the spot. Then, with cold authority, he dragged Rachel into the prayer chamber. Inside were several mangled corpses, half decayed, half alive. These were the so-called Lords of Death, worshipped by the cult. According to their twisted rules, Rachel should now be sacrificed and turned into one of them. But her sister couldn't bring herself to do it, because she knew one strike of the blade would mean losing her sister forever. Meanwhile, Ben and Tweeter were outside, desperately plotting. Tweeter had already been bitten, and she knew her time was running short. So she made the call. She would create chaos, while Ben used the distraction to get Rachel out. They agreed on a meeting point. Then, without hesitation, Tweeter ambushed a guard, cleaving him down. When his corpse reanimated, she hacked off chunks of his flesh and used them to lure the zombies straight into the prayer chamber. Within moments, the place descended into pure chaos. And in the middle of it all, Tweeter stormed in, guns blazing, spraying lead in every direction. The cult leader slipped away in the madness, but there was no time to chase him. Instead, Tweeter rushed to Rachel, slashing through her restraints. She told Rachel to run, to find Ben and escape. As for herself, Tweeter was headed for the beast pens. If she didn't release the monsters inside, none of them were getting out alive. Ben had just reached the rendezvous point when, suddenly, a zombie bit him on the shoulder. He cursed loudly and swung his iron bar, ready to fight, only to realize the creature could speak. It wasn't actually a zombie. It was another one of the cult's servants, normally tasked with mimicking the undead. With one powerful swing, Ben knocked it down. And only then did he remember. Tweeter hadn't turned yet. There was a good chance she, too, had been bitten by a servant earlier. Just then, Rachel arrived at the meeting point. She quickly caught Ben up to speed and learned that Tweeter was about to blow the beast pens. Ben's stomach sank. Meanwhile, Tweeter was already locked in battle with the guards protecting the pens. Fearless and relentless, she cut through several of them with deadly precision. Her next move was clear: blow the gates holding the zombies. She placed the explosives carefully, but just as she finished, Ben and Rachel arrived, shouting for her to stop. Tweeter had already made her decision. She was ready to sacrifice herself. With a deafening explosion, the iron gates shattered. Thousands of zombies surged out, teeth bared, attacking anything in sight. In minutes, The cultists who had once held control were wiped off the face of the compound. At that moment, the radio broadcasted the cult leader's speech. It turned out he was trying to rally the hidden spies for an early strike. Ben and the others quietly crept toward the studio. Ben moved up front, drawing the guards' fire, while Rachel climbed the side staircase to approach from above. But the moment she burst into the room, the cult leader, lying in wait behind the door, knocked her to the ground. As he raised his weapon to finish her off, a gunshot rang out from behind. It was Rachel's sister coming to her aid. The cult leader didn't expect one of his own priests to betray him. He slapped her down, only to get struck on the back of the head by Ben, who had arrived just in time. Once she confirmed his sister was safe, Rachel picked up a weapon from the floor. The cult leader turned pale, begging her not to shoot him in the head. But in the next instant, a spray of blood erupted from his forehead. The poor man never even got the chance to become a zombie. He was simply devoured by the undead. In the end, Ben left the island with Rachel and her sister, escaping the zombie-infested nightmare behind them. And that's the full story of Decade of the Dead. Interestingly, this story isn't packed with zombie scenes. Most of it focuses on moral and faith-based dilemmas. Fans of this kind of story should definitely check out the original film, but for others, it might feel a little slow. Alright, that's it for today. If you enjoyed the recap, be sure to stay tuned, and we'll see you in the next video.